The American family.
I've always wanted to be a mom. My husband always wanted to be a dad.
It is the dream of adding a child's laughter to your home.
You want to protect a child. You want to give them a nice bed and toys.
Sometimes those who ache for parenthood have to turn to science for help.
You put so much faith into the physicians and the medical team.
In vitro fertilization, a lifeline for couples who've run out of options.
Some of them, that was their only shot.
Then a busted refrigerator ripped those dreams apart.
To have this taken away and to be just your hopes and dreams destroyed, it's a tremendous loss.
It is the loss of thousands of eggs and embryos for hundreds of men and women dreaming of parenthood. We are only beginning to understand the devastating impact.
Sometimes we keep the door closed because it's kind of painful to look in and see an empty crib and wonder, you know, is there ever going to be a baby in here?
The unbearable heartbreak.
I think I'm going to be feeling this every day.
The endless questions with no answers.
For all of my eggs damaged, what's the process of understanding the viability of them now? What are my options now?
Some of these couples are taking the only option that feels concrete: legal action.
I think it's pretty clear this is far more catastrophic than what the hospital has let on.
And the fallout from this disaster is only beginning.
The University Hospital is behaving like an airline that just had a plane crash.
Trust broken, dreams shattered. 4,000 eggs and embryos destroyed. To many of the couples who just had their lives turned upside down, they were so much more than embryos. They were children, their babies, and now they will never get to bring them home. Welcome to our News 5 special, Broken Trust, an in-depth look at the fertility crisis at university hospitals and the hundreds of couples whose hopes for their futures just got ripped apart. Women looking to bring a new baby into their homes can find out the odds of having a healthy child through using a fertility center, but it turns out no one knows how many mistakes or malfunctions are happening at those facilities charged with protecting a couple's most precious possession. 5 on Your Side investigator Sarah Buttison uncovered serious concerns about the government's failure to regulate fertility centers.
Being kind is doing a nice thing for someone.
After conceiving Ethan,
Like helping them or giving them a hug.
through in vitro fertilization,
The goal has always been to give him a biological sibling.
Amber and Elliot Ash hoped
And it hurts so much to know that
to expand their family.
it doesn't look really good for us to be able to fulfill that.
3 weeks ago, they learned on the news their best chances were gone.
I'm feeling like my babies, they were supposed to be safe and they weren't.
Their 2 frozen embryos were among more than 4,000 eggs and embryos lost.
It's heartbreaking to say the least.
There's really no way for a patient to know what is going on at a fertility clinic.
Brownie Lewis is a law professor at Cleveland State University and expert on legal issues involving reproduction. How often do problems happen?
I think probably more than we think.
5 on Your Side investigators also found fertility centers do not have to report mistakes and malfunctions to any government agency. The CDC only tracks IVF success rates, and the FDA only regulates medical devices directly involved in assisted reproduction, not storage tanks. What should we learn from all of this?
We should learn that if we're going to continue letting medical technology create different ways to have children, we have to regulate it.
We had no reason to think that there was any chance that they were going to do harm to our embryos. Whoa.
Their plans to give Ethan a sibling on hold. Amber and Elliot hope by sharing their story.
We hate even calling them just embryos because to us it was really all about frozen children for us.
No one else will need to.
They were our frozen babies, and there needs to be something done so another family doesn't have to go through this again.
So far, just one Ohio lawmaker is calling for change. Representative Joe Schiavone says he plans to introduce legislation as soon as possible to require fertility centers to report when an egg or embryo is lost, as well as other measures to protect their safety and security. I'm 5 on Your Side investigator Sarah Buttison.
And that kind of change is what hundreds of families are demanding after this devastating slip-up at university hospitals. The grief these families are feeling, it is palpable. News 5's Tara Molina has been our lead reporter on this crisis. Tara, you've spoken to so many couples who lost so much when the temperatures on those tanks started to rise.
Too many couples, Rob, and to say that this is heartbreaking, that doesn't even do this grief justice. The news that these eggs and embryos were lost changed these couples' lives forever. And they told me the way UH handled all of this is a slap in the face, especially the letter that was sent to patients earlier this week explaining this was a human mistake. Many of the couples I spoke with already had one child or they're able to try in vitro again. But for one couple, this was it. An entire nursery prepared, a plan in place. Kate and Jeremy Plant's future was in that university hospital storage tank. That future, their 5 embryos, all destroyed when that tank wasn't properly cared for, properly maintained.
It's a nightmare. We're living in a nightmare.
Kate Plants went through fertility treatments after her diagnosis with ovarian cancer. She had her uterus removed, but held on to hope of having a biological child one day through a surrogate.
We've always wondered, what would our kids be like? You know, part of her, part of me. And that's a reality we're never going to know.
And it's because this hospital dropped the ball. The letter they and every other patient affected just received outlines that and new details about what happened, also revealing twice as many eggs were affected than originally reported by UH.
The stuff that came out in the letter, it's almost like a slap in the face.
It reads, quote, "We know that the alarm system on the tank designed to alert a UH employee to temperature swings was off. But, quote, we don't know who turned the remote alarm off, nor do we know how long it was off." The letter going on to detail issues with the tank that UH employees knew about long before the malfunction. Quote, "We know that the tank in question needed preventative maintenance. The automatic fill for the liquid nitrogen broken. It was added manually."
This is mind-numbing to think how negligent, and it's a nightmare.
The embryology lab was also completely out of liquid nitrogen, and staff was borrowing it from another lab. And while the eggs and embryos were supposed to be moved to another tank while that tank was fixed, quote, "no eggs or embryos had yet been moved to the extra tank."
They were entrusted to protect these embryos and eggs with liquid nitrogen. That's how you do it. And you don't have the tanks available?
Attorney Tom Merriman is representing the couple. He says this totally changed the case.
This is about an entity that consciously disregarded a substantial danger. Consciously disregarded. They knew they had a problem.
The letter FedExed to patients earlier this week states University Hospitals plans to offer personalized medical services to all of the clients affected. They also offer to pay back the storage fees. But for couples like the Plants, there is nothing University Hospitals can do that will allow them to have a biological child.
And with 950 patients getting that letter, 950, there are sure to be many more like the Plants who have no more options for a child of their own. Tara, thanks for your reporting on this oh so very important topic. Now, that heartbreak is exactly why so many of those families were eager to hear what the head of the fertility clinic had to say for himself. It took 18 days after our first reports on this crisis for Dr. James Liu, the head of UH OBGYN, to sit down for an interview. But when 5 on Your Side investigator Sarah Buttison started asking questions, it turned out he didn't have much to say.
On March 3rd, the temperature rose too high inside a storage tank filled with 4,000 eggs and embryos. UH said the alarm that should have alerted staff was turned off.
Whose job is it to make sure those alarms work?
The alarms are unfortunately not checked in this case prior to this event happening over the weekend. So I am not certain when this alarm system was tested last.
Even though Dr. James Liu is in charge of the department that oversees the fertility center, he also didn't know how often the alarms have gone off in the past. We wanted to find out how the failure will impact the fertility center's future. But watch as we're cut off by media relations strategist Mike Ferrari.
Why would any fertility patient want to come here?
Because we take good care of our patients as best we can on a case-by-case basis.
How can you say that?
We're good. We got the essence of time here.
We then tried to find out who is ultimately responsible for the failure, but we're told our time was up.
Who do you blame?
I don't think we can blame anyone at this point in time until the investigation is conducted.
Are you to
completed.
Blame? Doc, we're done.
I'm 5 on Your Side investigator, Sarah Buttison.
Well, if you'd like to see what else Dr. Lou had to say, we put Sarah's entire interview online. Just visit news5cleveland.com or download the News 5 app. There is much more to come on our News 5 special, Broken Trust.
You wouldn't want to have all of your eggs in one tank.
But that is exactly what university hospitals did, and boy, did it backfire. Dr. Lou returns to explain why.
Those embryos represented their hopes, their promise of having children and a family.
And with those dreams now crushed, a lot of families are looking up good lawyers. The slew of lawsuits piling up against UH when our News 5 special report, Broken Trust, continues. Welcome back to our News 5 special report, Broken Trust. 4,000 eggs and embryos destroyed because somebody at university hospitals screwed up. We've been digging into this crisis for weeks and learned that procedures across fertility hospitals, they are very different. A doctor from a well-known clinic in Tucson explained they would never keep all of one patient's eggs or embryos in one place. But that's exactly what happened here. We asked the head of OBGYN at UH, why?
You wouldn't want to have all of your eggs in one tank. That potentially would be devastated if something were to happen.
You put everything in one tank here at UH.
That was the design of the tank, and that was the design when the laboratory was constructed.
Dr. Lou added the clinic is considering going back to using lower technology tanks where specimens can be stored separately. Now, even before Dr. Lou tap danced around our questions, patients from the fertility clinic were gearing up for a fight. The first lawsuits were announced just days after the failure was revealed to the world. News 5's Tara Molina back with us now. And Tara, the legal hits just keep on coming for university hospitals.
They keep on coming, Rob. We know the community impacted by this is huge here in Northeast Ohio. Thousands of eggs likely unviable, according to the hospital. About 950 families are struggling right now, and at least some of them are turning to law firms for help. At this point, we know at least 17 lawsuits have been filed.
Plaintiffs viewed their eggs and embryos as their future children.
New lawsuits were announced almost daily after UH admitted its fertility failure. Pfeiffer, Rosca, and Wolf represent one of the hundreds of couples who got the devastating news.
The clinic called the Pennsylvania couple and told them that their embryos had been destroyed by the tissue storage bank temperature fluctuations.
Now, University Hospitals is facing more than 17 lawsuits from heartbroken families, some who just lost their last chance at a biological child.
Those embryos represented their hopes, their promise of having children and a family.
DiCello, Levitt, and Casey, another firm involved, filing a class action lawsuit on behalf of Amber and Elliot Ash, who had 2 embryos stored with UH.
You put so much faith into the physicians and the medical team, and like I said, just to have this taken away and to be just your hopes and dreams destroyed.
The couple found out early on that their embryos are no longer viable.
Ask yourselves, what would it be like if I had my family treasure lost by a hospital that just didn't care enough to check on it?
Elliot Ash, diagnosed with a rare cancer in 2003, and at age 23, decided to bank his sperm before they were destroyed by chemotherapy. The couple have had their embryos stored at UH since 2014. Paying about $400 a year for the service.
The medical community calls it tissue. I like to think of it as my children, my frozen children.
Lance Groner, Greiko Merriman also announcing they're representing several patients involved.
Who's responsible? Is it the hospital? Is it some kind of vendor? Is it a manufacturer of the refrigeration system? There's a lot of different options, and those kinds of investigations will start now.
And university hospitals told me these lawsuits will not have any bearing on their independent review.
Tara, the lawsuits are only one of the challenges here that University Hospitals is facing right now. Also at risk is its accreditation.
Absolutely, Rob. The hospital right now, it's playing defense on all fronts, from accrediting agencies to state and federal agencies.
All right, you broke the story for us when the first accrediting agency started looking into UH. You found out it doesn't have to be accredited, but it chooses to be.
Right. Accreditation for these fertility clinics is actually elective. It's something that helps give them some credibility to attract their patients. And by choosing to put itself under that scrutiny, UH has to follow a lot of strict regulations that other fertility clinics might not. And still, we're dealing with this catastrophic failure, which leaves medical professionals wondering, how could this have happened when the standards were so high?
You put so much faith into the physicians and the medical team, and like I said, just to have this taken away and to be just your hopes and dreams destroyed.
Patients put their faith, hopes, and dreams into their hospital, their doctors. But they're not the only ones. For medical accreditation agencies, faith comes in another form: on-site inspections, scientifically rigorous requirements, and sets of quality standards. For accreditation, a hospital must maintain them. But after this major malfunction and blowout affecting hundreds, patients aren't the only ones left with questions.
We just don't know. We have to pursue our investigation of this, and, you know, I'm certain that the individual facilities are pursuing their own investigation.
The first external investigation announced: the College of American Pathologists. The group accredits 8,000 labs across the world. Most of them require accreditation, but we learned reproductive labs, like the one in UH, do not. University Hospital's reproductive lab is one of 350 that elects accreditation, making it mandatory they follow very specific requirements. Requirements the college is now investigating to determine if UH is in compliance.
I find it very hard to believe that in this day and age there are not better safeguards and practices that could be put in place.
And another accreditation agency investigating too: the Joint Commission's Office of Quality and Patient Safety, explaining via email action may be taken. Quote, "The Joint Commission may conduct an unannounced or unscheduled on-site evaluation of the organization." Both agencies are calling the malfunction rare, but
still be in compliance even though there was a failure of a particular instrument, or for that matter, if there were human error involved.
Both of the agencies investigating university hospitals, the College of American Pathologists and the Joint Commission, have said they will allow the hospital to address concerns brought up in their investigation before changing their accreditation status.
And we will be keeping tabs on both of those investigations. Thanks once again for your important reporting right from the start. Now, on top of all this, we just learned today the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid announced it's planning an inspection at UH in response to a complaint. CMS plans to put together a report on its findings once that inspection is done.
I've always wanted to be a mom. My husband always wanted to be a dad.
The road to parenthood can be an emotional roller coaster, and hundreds of couples are now at their lowest point. Their harrowing journeys and their grief. In their own words, when our News 5 special report, Broken Trust, returns.
The most effective way to stop the cancer and save my life was to take my uterus. So we were comforted by the fact that we have those embryos.
There was no chance for me to have a child the normal way, naturally.
It's kind of painful to look in and see, like an empty crib and wonder, is there ever going to be a baby in here?
It's beyond devastating. It's like a spiritual, emotional, physical loss.
Now that I know that they're not there anymore and that they are destroyed, I mean, my emotions are everywhere.
The medical community calls it tissue. I like to think of it as my children, my frozen children.
5 of our potentially future children, we call them our time-traveling babies. And they're just like, oops, sorry, we screwed up. It breaks my heart, it breaks his heart that we can't carry our own child.
Welcome back to our News 5 special report, Broken Trust. 4,000 eggs and embryos destroyed at university hospitals. All of the women you just heard from had to bear an incredible emotional and financial burden to try and grow their families. And in the end, they found out it was all for nothing. Across the country, 1 in 8 couples face infertility. For women, it brings the same level of anxiety and depression as cancer. And turning to science for help only adds to all of that stress because it's just so expensive. One round of in vitro fertilization can cost up to $15,000. Most women need a lot more than that. It still might not even work. Studies found a 36-year-old woman who freezes 10 eggs has a 30 to 60% chance of having a baby. We'd like to thank you for joining us tonight for our special report, Broken Trust, an in-depth look at the fertility crisis at university hospitals. We want to thank News 5's Tara Molina for joining us tonight and giving us all of these heartbroken families a voice over these past few weeks, and 5 on Your Side investigator Sarah Buttison as well for her tireless fight for accountability. All of our reporting on this topic is online for you to check out. You log on to news5cleveland.com or download the News 5 app. We'll be back right after this with your Power of 5 forecast.